Retired Navy pilot Lieutenant Ryan Graves is here in our studio right now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you also for your service.
Thank you.
10 years in the military. You say that the summer of 2014 to March 2015, during training missions off the East Coast, you and other pilots began detecting strange objects. How do you describe those encounters?
Yeah, we describe those encounters as identifying an unknown object in our airspace, and we do that through a number of different tools that we have available to us. When we first had this issue in 2014, we had just upgraded our radar system, and that's really our primary tool that we use to look out and see objects in our area. And when we upgraded that radar, we started seeing objects on our radar displays that we weren't seeing just the day before. And that was our first indication that something wasn't quite right in that area.
Okay, these were new items, new technology. I don't pretend to know all of the vernacular. You're in the Navy and I'm just sitting here on TV. But with new technology can come glitches, right? You're working out the bumps. Did you think, oh, this is just a glitch or something? Because you're seeing this through your instruments, not with your naked eye.
Correct. At this point, we had only seen it with our instruments and only the radar. And to your point, our first thought was this was likely some type of radar error or what we would call a false track. However, we eventually got close enough to these objects where some of our other sensors, one called the FLIR system, which is essentially just a camera, it was also detecting these objects at the same location that our radar was indicating.
So two sources of this object are coming into play. You said, and I heard you, this defied anything you'd ever seen.
Absolutely.
In what way?
Well, we started seeing behaviors as we started to identify these over time. We started observing the behaviors that they were exhibiting. At first, they were stationary, which doesn't sound that exciting, but stationary objects in the sky, it's typically hurricane force winds up there, at least 40 knots, 50 knots, maybe 100 knots. So when something is perfectly stationary, zero airspeed above a location on the ground, that's very unusual.
So it looks like it's hovering, right? Or stationary meaning like hovering?
Correct, but with no thermal exhaust, no gas being pushed out of it, no propeller systems, no wings. And it would do that for very long periods of time, all day.
Now, the New York Times, as I said, we're talking about credible reports here. You told the New York Times that at first you speculated that the objects were a classified drone program. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, this is a drone. We've seen a lot of different shapes and sizes of drones. It's drones. You thought the same thing. But in early 2014, you saw a close friend from the squadron who was just back from a mission, and you said he had a look of shock on his face.
Yeah.
So this is another military personnel, and he had a look of shock. What had he seen?
This was a squadron mate that I've been flying with nearly daily for the past couple of years in this squadron. And to your point, he came back to the ready room, he canceled the flight, and I saw him with his mouth open with a look of shock on his face, and he said, I almost hit one of those darn things.
How did he describe it?
Yeah, so if I can, we fly essentially in a big cube outside in the airspace off the coast of Virginia Beach, and all the aircraft, they enter and exit that cube at essentially a doorway. And two aircraft from our squadron were flying out essentially through that doorway, and one of these objects was completely stationary directly at that doorway.
And he saw it with his own eye, not on the instruments?
Correct. It went right between the two aircraft, about 50 feet away.
And what was it? What did he describe it as?
He described it as a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere.
So with his eyes, he saw a dark cube in a clear sphere.
Correct.
Have you seen anything in your military service that fit that description?
Not anything that would be able to perform the way it was performing. So we didn't only see these stationary at the entrance to working areas. We would also see these objects at about 250 to 300 miles per hour flying in patterns. We'd also see them supersonic over the speed of sound, flying straight east to the ocean.
So, Lieutenant, I'm going to be the average person, not a member of Congress. I see this, I land, and I'm like, somebody get the cameras. I need to talk to everybody. I need to tell the world that this is happening. Why did it take until this congressional hearing years later for us to hear this?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that there was a massive stigma around this issue. Pilots like myself didn't want to stand up and say, hey, we don't have an explanation for what we're seeing. We were afraid that we were going to look silly or it was going to negatively impact our career.
You told Politico, we have a real UFO problem and it's not balloons. When we come back, what you meant by that line, more of this conversation I know you weren't expecting, but we say let's talk about it, and I want to talk about this, and we'll be right back.
Are there common characteristics to the UAPs that have been cited by different pilots, and can you describe what the convergence of descriptions is?
Certainly. We were primarily seeing dark gray or black cubes inside of a clear sphere.
I'm sorry, dark gray or black cubes?
Yes, inside of a clear sphere, where the apex or tips of the cube were touching the inside of that sphere. And that was primarily what was being reported when we were able to gain a visual tally of these objects. And that occurred over almost 8 years. And as far as I know, it's still occurring.
We are back. We're pulling back the curtain on this conversation that seems to be happening, but not loud enough. And it is about UAPs, or unidentified anomalous phenomena. We're with retired Navy pilot Lieutenant Ryan Graves. So for clarification, I grew up saying UFO, and it changed because of the fact that it can be in air or in water. Is that the case?
A bit more of an agnostic term. Instead of saying it must be a flying object, this is something that could be underwater, could be in space. It's not necessarily flying. It could be propelled by other means.
You said in Politico, we have a real UFO problem, and it's not balloons. You say your experience is not an isolated incident. This summer, you testified, as we pointed out, along with retired Navy pilot Commander David Fravor, who in 2004 witnessed a mysterious tic-tac-like object. You both are among those who are breaking the silence, and there's always criticism that comes with that. There's always speculation. I'm sure people have dug into everything about you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I joined the Navy when I was pretty young, and I've held a security clearance for quite some time. Right. So I think in some sense I've already been vetted by the military for a period of time. But even that didn't give me the comfort to come out and speak my mind on this topic, because there was such a risk associated with speaking about something that's just even loosely associated with the cultural stigma that's around UFOs.
Yeah. You're so disturbed by the lack of action by our government that you actually started your own organization, recruiting some of the brightest minds on the planet who are committed to investigating these mysteries. You say that this is a national security threat.
Absolutely. I started the organization Americans for Safe Aerospace because we saw our need to better educate the media, better educate our representatives on Capitol Hill. This is a national security issue. When there are objects within our airspace that we don't know where they're from, where they're going, or what they can do, that's a national security issue that we need to take seriously.
Before I let you go, in September, another big trending story, the Mexican government held its own congressional hearing into UFOs, where it was alleged that remains of an alien body were showcased. That's what you're seeing there. You were invited by a Mexican congressman to speak about your experience, and you were not happy with what happened here because it turned out not obviously to be real.
The invitation was to go and speak to various pilots from South America and Central America to be able to speak with the Mexican Congress to convince them that, hey, we need to have reporting for commercial pilots within Central and South America. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to me, this stunt was planned to occur near the end of the hearing, and this really sets the conversation back in my mind because it was brought forward with no scientific evidence. It was done without communicating this to any of the other attendants, and we need to lead this conversation with data and science and not these type of spectacles.
And this really upset you because you're going there to have a substantive conversation and someone else is pulling a stunt.
Exactly.
Well, you are speaking up. I know you've assembled a lot of people. I appreciate you coming here because I know that it takes a lot to be on the forefront of a conversation like this. So thank you for your service, first of all, and thank you for joining us on this. Thanks, Ryan.